Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Regan King and I'm joined by my co-host Simon Barrett. Good to see you, Simon.
Good to see you as well, Regan.
We're asking an important question this evening. I'm sure it will facilitate some very good discussion. Is abortion about to be outlawed in America? Could abortion now be outlawed in America? This follows the Mississippi abortion law in 2018, wherein the state of Mississippi sought to ban all abortions after 15 weeks, except in some circumstances such as medical emergency. And so if we consider that attempt at a ban in 2018. We bring ourselves now to the end of 2021. The Supreme Court is looking to uphold that important law that could see up to 25, but almost certainly 21 states actually begin to restrict abortion, if not banning it in its entirety. Simon, always great to have these in-depth discussions and to be able to talk these things out. What's your perspective?
Well, I find this absolutely extraordinary because Donald Trump's legacy, he appoints 3 conservatives to the Supreme Court in his 4 years in office. And they are set to actually change the entire social culture of the United States. And this is what's amazing. This is what, I mean, all I can say is all but God. Because 2020, Biden allegedly wins the presidential election. The Democrats take both houses of Congress, the Senate and Congress itself. So in other words, they have unprecedented power, and it all looks like the progressives have got hold of America. They've got hold of the political apparatus, and there is no hope after 4 years of Christians being invited to the White House, given incredible access over policy and influence, including Mike Pence as a born-again believer as the vice president, and Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State. It almost looks like there is no hope left anymore. And then what we see with this incredible case of the Mississippi law wanting to implement this abortion and limit abortion, I think, to 14 weeks?
15, yeah.
15 weeks. Because the lower courts in the Mississippi state were blocking it, then it got taken to the Supreme Court. So effectively what we are seeing here is that the seeds could be sown for the overthrow of the Roe versus Wade Federal Abortion Act of 1973. But what was also so interesting as well, that if the Conservatives are able to identify that as biblically that life starts at conception, then abortion could be outlawed by the Fourth Amendment in the US Constitution. Absolutely incredible stuff.
Yeah, it would be amazing. But there is this barrier of Roe versus Wade. It's a core law that defines this discussion in the United States at the moment. It goes back to 1973. So what exactly are we talking about when it comes to Roe versus Wade? What is the significance of that ruling, and why is it that the Supreme Court is really focusing on that?
Well, I think you're more of an expert on this than I am, Regan. But I think if we take a step back, we realise that the Roe versus Wade case back in 1973 actually put a kind of federal ruling that no states could actually restrict abortion. I think it's is it up to 23 or 26 weeks?
Yeah.
So effectively what we see with this case is that every state has had to follow the Supreme Court's ruling on the abortion issue, which means that every state has had to allow abortion to take place. Now, that has been the mantra of the Democrats, that has been the mantra of the left for almost the past 50 years. And now it looks like this is going to be overturned and will actually, as a legislation, just literally fall apart, as it will give more, as this Mississippi ruling, which is set to be listened to in June of 2022, could actually mean that, as you said, 21 other US states could follow suit and decide to restrict abortion or ban abortion, and there's nothing that the Democrats can do about it. There's nothing the Supreme Court can do about it, because they're actually in favour of it, because they have a majority of 63 in favour of amending these abortion laws. So it's absolutely astonishing.
There are 8 states, including my home state, Arkansas, and the fullest Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Michigan, Mississippi, Oklahoma, West Virginia, and Wisconsin, that still actually have abortion bans on their books that could be reinstated and reimposed should Roe versus Wade be in some measure struck down, which would be amazing. Texas also has a similar law under injunction by a federal court. So we have already a significant number of states that could automatically begin to go back to those rulings. You know, abortion is not a new issue. It's not a 21st century issue. It's not a 20th century issue. There have been discussions. You can go back to the classics in ancient times and see discussions about the ethics of abortion. Seneca, Aristotle, these guys, they actually would address these type topics. So this is nothing new, but legal abortion is something, and discussing the morality of abortion in this level is so significant when it comes to acknowledging the value of life from conception. And that's really what we're talking about here, and that's really why the Supreme Court is looking at the ins and outs of the Mississippi law, Roe versus Wade. The case itself that's being considered is called the Dobbs case. We'll be talking with one of the legal experts who helped file one of the amicus briefs for that in just a bit. But Roe versus Wade, it was presented to the U.S. Supreme Court on January 22nd, 1973. The ruling was 7-2. The unduly restrictive state regulation of abortion is unconstitutional. In a majority opinion written by Justice Harry A. Blackmun, the court held that a set of Texas statutes criminalizing abortion in most instances violated a woman's constitutional right of privacy, which is found to be implicit in the liberty guarantee of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, it does get a little bit technical into some of the constitutional elements of the United States, but it's extremely significant. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, is that clause in the 14th Amendment. The case began in 1970 when an individual under the pseudonym Jane Roe, her real name Norma McCorvey, instituted federal action against Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas County, Texas, where Roe resided. The Supreme Court disagreed with Roe's assertion of an absolute right to terminate pregnancy in any way and at any time, and attempted to balance a woman's right of privacy with the state's interest in regulating abortion. In his opinion, Blackmun noted that only a compelling state interest justifies regulations limiting fundamental rights such as privacy, and that legislators must therefore draw statutes narrowly to express only the legitimate state interests at stake. The court then attempted to balance the state's distinct compelling interest in the health of pregnant women and in the potential life of the unborn child. It placed the point after which a state's compelling interest in the pregnant woman's health would allow it to regulate abortion at approximately the end of the first trimester of pregnancy. so around the 12-week mark. Regarding the baby, the court located that point at capability of meaningful life outside the mother's womb, or viability, which up to this point has been considered as occurring at about 24 weeks of pregnancy, though. Simon, even in recent weeks, I saw a report where a child was born at 21 weeks, and with help, with aid, was able to survive with the beauties of certain modern medical interventions.
No, absolutely, and I think it's extremely interesting. I mean, taking notes on this one, that according to this Mississippi law known as the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, we see that more than 65 million American women would immediately lose access to abortion in their home states if the US Supreme Court strikes down the landmark case that established the right to seek a procedure nearly half a century ago. So currently existing laws on the books in 20 states ban abortions or impose substantial restrictions on women or on abortion providers. These laws are on hold, either blocked by the courts or suspended by the High Court's 1973 Roe versus Wade decision. So it's quite extraordinary to think that 65 million American women that at the moment have the possibility of having abortion will be restricted from doing so. And that's important because it's all about the kind of sanctity of life. And we're going to go on later probably talk about the kind of Democrats and the progressives' reaction to this, which is one of absolute rage and one of absolute anger. But what it does is it significantly makes a spiritual declaration to say that that abortion is wrong, and that God sees the shedding of innocent blood as a crime and a sin upon a nation. And to think that, for example, in this country, that 9 million babies have been aborted since 1967 with the Abortion Act. I just to think how many babies have been aborted in the United States since Roe versus Wade. And therefore, this affects the spiritual climate of a nation. And this is why it's so important, because, like I said before, we pretty much thought that the progressives and the Democrats had total power after the 2020 presidential elections. But now we're seeing that actually when we reach our darkest moment, this is when God intervenes. So we could see abortion being overthrown in the United States, and certainly 21 US states adopting a position where they become anti-abortion, protecting and saving so many lives.
Absolutely, Simon. And in regard to recent years, we do see that in the United States, the number of abortions has actually been decreasing in recent years, which may be indicative of a few factors, but could be indicative of a generation, a new generation that is increasingly swinging back towards more pro-life values. There is some evidence that among some groupings of millennials and Gen Z, there's a more openness to talking about the ethics of abortion or the lack thereof. So we have in 2019 a total of 346 abortions reported in the United States. That's 2019. That compares with roughly about 200,000 in the UK. But in 2016, there were 874,100 reported in the United States. We are live and interactive. Thank you for the emails that are coming in. Here we have this from Glenda, which really goes to the root of the subject. I think you've hit on something good here, Glenda, in regard to the church's role in this. I really hope that the church would teach about sexual purity, and that should be for males and females. It's not even taught in church. The leaders of the church as a whole are letting the youth down. I know some would say that you can't shut Pandora's box, but it doesn't mean that the church should not try. Look, there's so many things that we could talk about in relation to that, but ultimately a lot of the crisis linked with abortion, and from my work on a pregnancy helpline, the calls that we've received very often are from individuals who are frustrated, they feel ashamed, they feel guilty, or they're upset with themselves because in some cases people don't even know who the father is. There have been 2 or 3 different possibilities. And that just shows that we're living in a very promiscuous environment, a very promiscuous culture. Indeed, the church should be teaching about sexual purity. This is an interesting one from James in Brantford. I might have more sympathy for the anti-abortion brigade if they weren't so opposed to gay adoption. If Mr. Barrett and co. don't want these children aborted and they don't want them adopted, what exactly do they want done with them? So I'm not really certain where that comes into our discussion. To some degree, James, we're talking about where life begins. Life begins from conception. It doesn't matter who an individual is or what else is going on. I mean, there's resources out there, there's alternatives, there's adoption, and adoption is, of course, regulated according to various governments' rules. But this is really fundamentally about the life of the unborn child, when life begins, and the fact that this is a distinct entity made in the image of God, that is to be valued and that's to be protected. Keep those emails coming in, guys. Right now we're going to go to our first news report, and we will discuss this more as we go through the program.
In the Dobbs case, the court will consider whether or not pre-viability bans on abortion are constitutional. And in doing so, it could overrule its landmark case of almost 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade.
This is the case for everyone to be watching, to see what is that standard. Are we able to restrict abortion prior to viability?
2 prominent abortion fighters, Americans United for Life President Catherine Foster and Susan B. Anthony List President Marjorie Dannenfelser, say it's hard to overstate this case's importance.
I think that because 4 Supreme Court justices had to agree to take up this law, that they were pretty sure that they had some sort of consensus to alter the current Supreme Court view of Roe versus Wade.
The court will consider a Mississippi law that prohibits abortion after 15 weeks, except for a medical emergency or severe fetal abnormality. What's radical is that in asking the court to uphold its state law, Mississippi is directly challenging the precedent in Roe and the 1992 decision in Casey v. Planned Parenthood, a clear ruling that states cannot ban pre-viability abortions, that is, abortions before a child can survive outside the womb.
This is the first time in 30 years that the court has been explicitly asked to overturn Roe.
Roe declared that the right to privacy includes the right for women to choose abortion, and it warned that denying abortion would bring hardship. In Casey, the court argued that women had come to rely on it.
It turned into the big lie. There is economic freedom.
To tell us that we can't just survive, that we can't be women in America without legalized abortion, what an offensive notion. We should be able to do that. That's what we're built for.
In Casey, the court also used stare decisis, the legal principle that courts must follow precedent to justify Roe. Foster and many other scholars insist, however, that many reasons exist for overturning Roe, including social unrest, which shows that it is not settled.
In fact, Supreme Court Justice now Amy Coney Barrett, in her confirmation hearings, she was asked if she believed that Roe was a settled issue. And her response, it hit the nail on the head. She said, well, I keep getting questions about Roe, which I think to me says that it's not settled.
Across the country, rallies to reverse Roe have begun. Even if the court doesn't decide to overturn, it could still uphold the Mississippi law, signaling to states that the door is open for more restrictions. But Foster and Dannenfelser are preparing for Roe to be overhauled and looking to the states.
The people who really are focused on this are the governors of this country, and they are the new leaders when it comes to the pro-life issue.
Dannenfelser is especially mindful of states with so-called trigger laws that could immediately outlaw abortion if Roe is overturned. They'll need extra political and legislative help, plus services for women. For Foster, the work is personal as well. She had an abortion 20 years ago.
I know what it's like to sit in that waiting room and feel so conflicted, and the feelings of fear and helplessness and just totally out of control.
For almost 50 years, Roe has encouraged and paved the way for such abortions. Now, Foster, Dannenfelser, and untold women and men are wondering if we're on the verge of a new era. On December 1st, due to COVID restrictions, the public will not be allowed inside the court, but outside, large crowds are expected in anticipation of a ruling in the months to come that could radically alter the abortion landscape. Reporting in Washington, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, many thanks to our friends at CBN for that very helpful news report. Just a reminder, we are live and interactive, and we're asking the question this evening, could abortion be outlawed in America? Viewers, please do send in your thoughts in relation to this question. Now, Simon, let's talk a little bit about the impact of the Supreme Court's consideration, and let's say they do uphold this Mississippi law from 2018, the Dobbs versus Jackson, the Women's Health Organization. What's the impact looking like? How exactly are we going to see this happen?
It essentially means that Roe versus Wade ruling of 1973 will be overturned. I think that excellent news report by CBN makes that the case, that as we saw, 21 US states will kind of follow Mississippi's lead, and by doing so will actually probably outlaw abortion in its entirety. So, I mean, it's very clever, this Mississippi law, because it starts off at 13 weeks. So clearly they knew that they had no chance in bringing in legislation that would say, we want to ban abortion in its entirety, because it would never be on the statute books. The fact is they then recognize 13 weeks. This is a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. And they thought, let's test the waters with this. And also the fact is that, is it Connie Barrett, who is the latest appointee by President Trump to the Supreme Court, is a devout Catholic. She's very passionate about the issue of abortion and defending the unborn. And you can see that they are really thinking that they can make an incredible difference. I mean, we've seen that the Democrats and the liberals have pretty much dominated the Supreme Court really since the early 70s. And this is a real opportunity now for Christians in America to stand up for the unborn. And this is why so much prayer needs to be given to those brave and courageous Christians on the Supreme Court to make this righteous decision that will actually affect the spiritual health and well-being of the United States, plus also protecting the innocent and the unborn. That's why it's so significant. And also I think this is a landmark case worldwide, because if America can overthrow almost 50 years of abortion legislation, then there's a chance that we can do it here. There's a chance that European nations can follow suit and adopt the same momentous and the same idea to actually say, no, we're not doing this anymore. Because this really goes down to whether our nation receives a blessing from the Lord or it's under a curse. And our nation and the West have pretty much been under a curse ever since we allowed this legislation to come forth to actually outlaw abortions in its entirety, and to actually realise, and the wording I don't like it. Obviously I've studied quite a few articles for this one in the Atlantic and on the Hill and other publications, and I refer to the baby as a fetus. It's almost like you dehumanise it, and this is what I don't like in our contemporary culture. If you have a baby and you cherish it and you want it, it's a baby. Yeah. But if you don't want it, then it's no longer a baby, it's a fetus. You know, and I hate this dehumanizing of what is actually God's creation, and to think that something is so innocent and so fragile as a baby that has that gift of life and then you kind of exterminate that gift of life because more likely to do with convenience than anything else. This doesn't fit in with my life at the moment. This could threaten my job. You know, I'm not going to take that responsibility. So this is the most precious thing that any woman can have. Is a gift of having a baby, whatever the circumstances of how that baby came about. That is what should be upheld, and the law should uphold this dignity of life, because if we don't, then life becomes meaningless.
Yes.
You know, and then, you know, there is no standards or legal precedents to actually look after the well-being of mankind, because it's up to one government, it's up to another government to decide, nah, you know, humanity doesn't matter. We want to get rid of our old people because they're a burden on our society. Where does it stop?
That's a very good question to ask, Simon. I think you did hit the nail on the head there in regard to convenience. Just to clarify on some statistics for some of our viewers. Some people will say, oh, no. Most people will have abortions. Most people having abortions because of rape or because of incest or because of, some medical issue to save the mother's life or whatnot. No, let's just look at the UK statistics, because that's where we are. And I'm more familiar, actually, with the UK statistics. We have over 200,000 abortions every single year. 98% of those abortions are carried out under ground C, which are mental health grounds. 99% of the 98% of those are without any mental health diagnosis. Now, when I've spoken with poster boards of women about this who've come with deep feelings of regret and sadness and looking into things, one particular case that was published in the Daily Telegraph and on Sky News last year, a woman was checked as having an abortion under mental health grounds. She did not know that she was registered as having an abortion for mental health grounds until after the abortion. And she realized, okay, this is basically just a box checking exercise. She said she was feeling sad and she was feeling a bit upset and a bit conflicted. They just checked her off as mental health ground. Now she is really struggling. As many do, because of the abortion and wishes she hadn't had it. Here's an email that I think we need to respond to. Eddie says, hi guys, abortion is not a salvation issue. And he mentions a couple of individuals, George W. Bush and his wife Laura. They're both born-again Christians. George is anti-abortion while Laura is pro-abortion. I can't speak for President George W. Bush or for Laura Bush at all, but I want to address the situation, Eddie. We have to understand, this goes back to a valuing of life. Where does life come from? Okay, we look in the Old Testament and we see that people gathered in the valley of Hinnom, right? Gehinnom, which became used as an analogy, really, of hell eventually. And they made their sons and their daughters sacrifices to various gods, to fertility gods, but the Baals and other gods of the Canaanites. When they did that, they were sacrificing for something they believed they would receive some favor in return or some comforts in return. I believe that in many ways, abortion is a secular sacrifice. We sacrifice for career. We sacrifice for convenience. I know and have talked with people who have been considering sacrificing so they can their child so they can continue going to the gym or so they can go on holiday to the beach and look good and whatnot. So. Eddie, I think it goes a lot deeper. I can't speak for the salvation of George W. Bush or Laura Bush, and I won't. That's not my place. But I will say I think Christians need to stand up and speak out on this issue and recognize this is a serious issue. It is a matter that if we support life with the Lord, if we support death, what are we supporting?
Yeah, but look at the consequences. I mean, for example, we'll take the UK, for example, 9 million aborted babies since 1967. Now, that's how many of those would go on to create offspring of their own?
Yeah.
And have families of their own? How much are we losing out on kind of scientists, on innovators,
And some researchers.
Businessmen, businesswomen, actors and actresses, an incredible talent that has just been wasted, and lives that have been wasted because they've never had the chance to have a life. But also what's more significant is the fact that because of the abortion acts, we have a shortage in our workforce, which meant that we've had to bring in different cultures and different nations to fill those jobs that would be normally given to those who wouldn't be aborted. So effectively what we're seeing, particularly when we come against a kind of hostile population whose entire goals is to overthrow the state. And we've sown the seeds for our own destruction with this. Because I know that when historians look back at the next 50, 60 years, that's if the world continues to go on without the rapture, without the tribulation period, without all that period, this will be the seeds they'll recognize as being the West sowed its own seeds for its own destruction. Because when you look at it, it's led to a kind of radicalization of our society and our cultures. And once you have a population that reach a tipping point, they reach the majority, then they're the ones that are going to set the political agenda. They're the ones that are going to decide what policies the government introduce. They're the ones that are going to dictate what they want. So we could have some incredibly harsh and extreme set of legislation put on us, which would completely alter the whole character and the nature not only of Britain, but also of Europe as well. And why? Because of abortion, because we killed our populations.
We're having a population crisis, and this is not something that is realized only by believers in Jesus Christ. I saw earlier today a statement made by the entrepreneur and billionaire Elon Musk, who said, "Look, unless we start having more children, then we're headed to a real crisis." Earlier, I was able to have the privilege to speak with a woman who is general counsel for Heartbeat International. Danielle White actually helped file the amicus brief for the Dobbs case that's being considered by the Supreme Court. It was my privilege to interview her. Here's what she had to say. Well, I'm joined by Danielle White, who is General Counsel for Heartbeat International. Danielle, good to have you on the program.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Okay, so tell us a little bit about what's going on in regard to the Dobbs case. We've been in the program outlining a little bit about Roe versus Wade, some of the background to that. Tell us what's happening right now and what is your involvement in it?
Right. So Mississippi passed a piece of legislation that bans most abortions after 15 weeks of gestation. There are some exceptions, but most abortions after 15 weeks. The case was waiting at the Supreme Court for a long time to be heard. There were a lot of analysts who thought perhaps the court wasn't going to take it at all. The Supreme Court does not have to take every case that is presented to it. And after, I believe it was about a year, the court finally granted cert, meaning they agreed to hear the case. So that happened just this past summer, early summer, and then oral arguments occurred here last week.
Okay, so this isn't the first time that a law along the lines of what Mississippi has looked to pass has been instituted by a state. Is that correct?
That's right. States have tried to institute limitations similar to this, or perhaps even earlier than what Mississippi has tried, but they've been all struck down by the lower courts pretty routinely as unconstitutional. And the reason for that is that in the Planned Parenthood versus Casey case, which basically sets up the test for abortion regulations, the court has said that a viability line exists. And prior to the viability line, it was not permitted for states to prohibit abortion entirely. They could regulate for health and safety as long as those regulations did not create an undue burden, but the states could not prohibit abortion. And so in the lower courts, whenever the states would try to enact limitations like this, the lower courts would just routinely strike them down. Mississippi applied for certiorari, appealed to the Supreme Court, asking the Supreme Court to reevaluate that viability line and say, could that viability line have moved? Is it still really there? And so those were some of the questions that the court was grappling with last week.
Okay, and what is the significance of this case going forward? I mean, could we actually see Roe versus Wade completely done away with?
You know, it's funny, before the oral arguments, if you would have asked me that question, I would have said, you know what, let's not get our hopes up. Let's not get out over our skis. But the oral arguments were very, very hopeful. This court has tended to want to move a little bit more slowly on issues like abortion, social issues. Some would say perhaps only from the conservative side they want to move slowly, but I thought it was more likely that the court would kind of tinker with the abortion law, maybe say, oh, well, viability is getting earlier and earlier. Maybe viability isn't a good line anymore. You know, there are some difficulties with the viability test itself. Whether a baby can live outside the womb can be highly dependent on where the baby lives, you know, where the baby's mother lives, what kind of access to medical care she has, what kind of resources she has. And so for the court to say, well, this viability line is the hard line, well, it's really not a great line because girls can live outside the womb sooner than boys, for example. So how can that be that the Constitution would require such a strange line? So I really thought that the court would kind of tinker with the abortion law. And that seemed to be the general consensus, as much as people were hoping that there might be an opportunity to reevaluate Roe. Then oral argument happened, and it was very interesting to hear the justices grappling with this question, because here in the United States, there's a concept called stare decisis, which means to stand by the things already decided. And the court is generally going to try to follow previous precedent. There are certainly instances where the court reverses itself, and there are some really consequential opinions where the court was reversing itself. For example, with Brown versus Board of Education, which ended segregation in our country. That was a momentous decision in which the court reversed itself. But it was very cool to see that, very encouraging to see that the justices seemed to be much more inclined, much more open to the concept of reversing Roe than what we maybe had hoped previously.
That's fantastic news. Would you say that this has in some way inflamed some tension on behalf of the pro-abortion lobby? I mean, I've just been reading some reports from the UK side of things, and it comes across that the pro-abortion lobby is very upset by this case. They're very upset with where it looks like it may be headed. Could it be that we're seeing in this case some of the tension between both political parties, the Republicans, the Democrats, maybe some backlash against progressive agendas of the Biden administration?
You know, abortion has been the most contentious social issue in this country for decades. And so certainly people are upset. People are generally going to be upset. I think what's really important for this court to remember, and for all of us to remember really, is that reversing Roe versus Wade does not end abortion in the United States. It simply sends the issue back to the states, which is how our system is meant to work. The states are supposed to be labs of public policy so that different states can enact policies that work for them. Other states can look to them and say, hey, that seemed to work for that state. Maybe we'll try that, or that didn't work, or our state is so different, so we're going to do something entirely different. And what the Supreme Court did in Roe versus Wade is it took the voice away from the American people, and it really inflamed the issue because people are upset, people are emotional, it's a hard issue, but there was nothing anybody could do about it really. And so the court picked winners and losers, and that just really wasn't acceptable to the people. So I think what we're going to see is a divergence between the states. You're going to have some states that have very restrictive abortion laws. You're going to see some states that probably are going to be paying for citizens' abortions, and then states that have everything in between. So it's not going to end the issue. No matter what this court decides, the issue of abortion, unfortunately, is not going to be over. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely passions on both sides. It's like I said, just a hard issue. But the reality is that no woman should ever feel so alone that she thinks she has to abort her baby in order to have a future. One of the things that Heartbeat did in this case is we submitted an amicus brief arguing against the notion put forth in Planned Parenthood versus Casey that women are relying on abortion in order to participate in the social and economic life of the nation. That's the words of the court, that women relied on abortion in order to participate in the social and economic life of the nation. And that's simply not true. There are so many options and so much support available to women. And so we hope that that by having this conversation, it's not new. Abortion has been a topic of conversation in this nation for a long time, but if there can be conversations at the state level where they're more localized, they're closer, then we can really talk about how do we help women, how do we empower them so that they don't feel so hopeless that they turn to abortion, and that we can support them so that they don't feel like they need abortion in order to participate in the social and economic life of the nation.
How many states do you think might actually legislate against abortion, or at the very least introduce heartbeat bills? Is there a number that you have in mind?
I believe the number I've seen is somewhere in the 20s, maybe in the mid 20s. And that seems about right. I think that it probably about half would adopt more restrictive abortion measures than what they've been permitted to do. And it's interesting because that's sort of brought up as like, oh no, the states will rush to prohibit abortion. But the reality is the states will only do that because that's what the people want them to do. The people in that state who have elected the representatives want them to do that. So it's not this horrible thing. It's a reflection of the values of the states themselves and the people that are in those states.
Okay, so would you say that the divide is very reflective of the sort of divide that we might see, say, in an election year? Is it really a Republican-Democrat issue? Is it not quite that straightforward?
I would say it does tend to fall along party lines, and I think that's unfortunate. I'm hopeful that maybe if there are these conversations happening at the state level, that maybe legislators will feel a little bit more open to exploring these issues, not from a red and blue question or a red and blue line, but really looking and evaluating what the people want in their states. I think when you take an issue and you nationalize it for 330 million people and you centralize all that power in Washington, there's just a lot more manipulation that can occur. And so bringing that issue back down to the states and giving the people a voice with their representatives, it will be interesting to see if it's still the case that Democrat means pro-abortion and Republican means pro-life. That could change. We hope it would change, that everyone would be more open to life, but it will be very interesting to see how things would shake up if this issue is returned to the states.
Absolutely. Now, tell us a little bit about Heartbeat International. This is, as I understand it, the world's largest crisis pregnancy care network of centers. How is Heartbeat International involved in this Dobbs case? What exactly can viewers pray for in regard to Heartbeat International and its important work? And where do you think Heartbeat International will go should the Dobbs case succeed?
It's funny. Heartbeat International is one of those organizations that if we woke up tomorrow and Roe were gone, we'd celebrate. We would just keep doing what we're doing, which is helping women and providing resources and just opening up options for them, providing support. So in terms of prayer, I mean, what a beautiful question. Thank you so much for asking that question. I guess just keep praying for us that we would be able to to reach out to women, to spread the word that this help is available. Sometimes it feels like the best kept secret. I think women who are in crisis might not necessarily realize everything that's available to them as far as help. And so praying for those women that they would be able to find the help that's truly going to empower them to be able to have their babies and also pursue their, their education, their relationships, their careers. So pray for the women that we serve. And then also pray for this court, for the clerks that are drafting opinions as we speak. The clerks are helping their justices draft the opinions for the drafting process, and for the courage to do the right thing. As for Heartbeat, you're right. We are the world's largest network of pro-life pregnancy help. We're on all 6 inhabited continents. The penguins don't need us quite yet. Yeah, so and Heartbeat exists to just provide that help for women. And so our role in this case has been, in the Supreme Court case, has been to tell that story, to tell the court, look, if you overturn Roe versus Wade, women are not going to be left bereft. Women are going to have the help and the assistance that they need. One thing that we really explored in our brief is how much pregnancy help has changed over the 50 years since Roe and the 30 years since Planned Parenthood versus Casey. The reality is that this network of pregnancy help did not exist as it does today. It wasn't nearly as robust. It was there. We were working, we were building it, but so much has changed in the last 30 years, 50 years, not only in how women live their lives with, just think about the internet. Just the advent of the internet alone has changed life for women, for everyone, so much since Planned Parenthood versus Casey was decided. But also we have this robust network of pregnancy help with so many resources and services available to women. And so our goal was to show the court that this safety net of pro-life pregnancy help exists in the United States and is only going to continue, really regardless of what the court decides.
One final observation and question. Sometimes in the years I've been involved in the pro-life movement in the UK, I hear this argument, oh, you're just pro-birth, not pro-life. And what you've described there is truly an example of how, no, actually, you are not just pro-birth, you are pro-life. This is about empowering the women. It's about empowering mothers with alternatives to abortion. How is it that those of us who are in favor of life can reason with and exemplify that same spirit and hopefully win others to our cause?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that sharing the message that women are so capable. Women are very capable of having their babies and pursuing their careers and their education, and that there's help available to them. I think that's a much more empowering message than you have to choose between your child and your career. And we know that that's not true. I mean, all of us can think of dozens of women in our lives who are both mothers and are pursuing careers or education. And that message is far more empowering than you have to choose abortion in order to be able to be successful. We know that that's just not true. So I think that, it's true that the pro-life movement sometimes gets a bad rep. We're only the accusation of we're only interested in seeing that baby born is simply not true. There's a whole network of pro-life pregnancy centers all over the globe that are existing, people who are serving women to make sure that they're supported, that the women are supported, because it's about building communities, building strong families, and seeing people truly thrive. It's not enough that people are just alive. We want to see people thrive. We want to see people experience the joy of motherhood. We want to see people experience the fulfillment that comes with both being a mom and pursuing dreams, which we really believe women can do. And we believe that there's so many people out there who want to help them accomplish that.
So thanks to Regan for that excellent interview with Danielle White. Want to bring in the closing part of this program some very, very interesting observations, and this is the abortion and the US Constitution. Now, according to some, abortion right opponents are quite literally looking for a Roe of their own. In other words, a landmark case which they can outlaw abortion. So according to the notes here, they're asking the court to recognise a baby's rights under the 14th Amendment, remembering that overturning Roe wouldn't make abortion illegal. It would mean that states could set their own abortion limits, which would no longer be subject to constitutional review. John Finnis, Professor Emeritus at the University of Notre Dame, recently made a very interesting argument in which he provided the framework for an anti-abortion right Supreme Court could be used to outlaw abortion across the United States. That if legislators who wrote the 14th Amendment viewed the unborn children as a person, if the Constitution recognises fetal parenthood, then unborn children would have the right to equal protection under and due process of the law. Abortion would be unconstitutional in the United States as well as Alabama, and other leading anti-abortion rights scholars have made the same arguments. And I'm just going to draw quickly from this. Said this one, that the anti-abortion rights movement mobilised in the 1960s pre-Way states begins loosening their criminal abortion laws. So effectively what we're seeing here is that the US Constitution, and I said the fourth Amendment was actually the 14th Amendment, so I apologise for getting that wrong, but effectively means that this could actually overthrow not only Roe versus Wade, but actually outlaw abortion in the United States as it's in entirety, and I think that is what we could potentially see now.
Well, we're likely to see a decision in this particular case next summer. So I'm sure this issue isn't going to go away, and we'll probably be doing some report at that time. But Glinda, she says, I have two precious adopted daughters. So glad the birth mothers did not choose abortion. That's wonderful. We have this perspective from B. Our NHS has gone more and more downhill since abortions were given free of charge in all countries of the EU. Women get more depressed after an abortion. They're more likely to have mental health problems. And there are statistics that seem to show that. God looks at our leaders and what they're allowing. God help us all. Kevin says, how wonderful if the abortion law in America is overturned. God's creation is life created before foundation of the world. Life is so precious. The unborn child needs a voice. I'm a Christian and follow God's ways. Life is given to celebrate God's love for those created forever. We also have John is saying so-called liberals seem to be obsessed with making abortion and increasingly euthanasia freely available. It has a sinister human sacrifice element to it that has been a part of many cultures in human history. Absolutely. John, we were talking a little bit about that earlier. Abortion, the amount annually worldwide is astronomical. It's a reflection of how wickedness has been on the increase. One of the reasons that God will eventually bring judgment on the world, and there is a law that you reap what you sow, but if people repent, there's forgiveness in Christ. Indeed, there is, and that figure is actually about 50 million every year, around the population of Spain, around the world. Stephen says, abortion is a terrible shame on our country, never mind America. It may have been forced upon Northern Ireland, but at least 50% of the people wanted it. I hope and pray that the U.S. Supreme Court make the right decisions. Britain usually follows suit with America, so I hope that they make the right decision. And that would be amazing if we could see similar discussions happening here. I'm hopeful. I think that we might be able to see that in the future. I'm certainly praying towards it.
No, absolutely, and I think that'll be a good thing. But at least we're having a discussion on this. At least there is actually some hope happening in the United States, despite the progressive agenda. And of course, the likes of Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, are absolutely furious. Liberals up in the United States are up in arms. But the great thing is that God is a God of justice. He's a God of righteousness. He knows what's happened and he knows everything that's going on because he's actually sovereign. So the fact is that we could have a reprieve with this Mississippi law that the US Supreme Court will be looking at in June is something that we need to pray in. And also for those other issues that affect abortion, we need to pray and intercede regarding these issues, because they are so critical, not only to the future of life, but also to our very foundation in the West, our Judeo-Christian heritage. And that's why it's important that we give a voice and we stand up for the unborn, and we pray for legislators they make righteous and godly decisions. So I want to thank you for watching tonight's Behind the Headlines.